Do you also find it difficult to build up a meaningful relationship with your grandchildren at a distance? As a long-distance aunt to a 2-year-old in Australia, I wanted to create a solution for the millions of family members who cannot be physically together all the time. This is why I created Peekabond, an app that helps you to connect with young children at a distance. The app works with the following 3 steps. First, we give playful activities suggestions that are based on your child's development stage. These suggestions are science-based and gamified. Secondly, you can create a private family circle. And finally, we'll let you send videos back and forth so you don't have to be live at the same time and save them in one spot for your grandchild to watch. We've got over 120 content suggestions. You can build a love bank for your grandchildren. And if you go to the Cool Grandpa website and look for the affiliate links, sign up for a newsletter with a lot of inspiring content, or you can try the app for free.
Hey folks, I want to talk to you about this application Readio. I strongly recommend Readio to help grandparents and parents read to their grandchildren remotely when they can't be in the same room. Whether you're living across the country, across the world, or you're just gone on a business trip, Readio makes it easy for you to read to those young ones when you're away. It's a super easy tool that allows for video monitoring across the top of the screen so they can see you and you can see them, as well as having the book prominently displayed, making it easy for you to read to those young ones, or better yet, having them read to you. What I want you guys to do is go to cool-grandpa.us, look for the affiliate link for Readio, click on that link, and sign up today for your free trial. I just wanted to remind you guys that I am starting to launch the speaking practice. Behind the scenes, I'm getting some things put together so I can start reaching out to organizations to talk about leadership from a grandfather's perspective. Now, if you think this might be a topic that your organization would enjoy hearing, please reach out to me. Ask me some questions. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. The other thing, too, that I've got going on is this personal podcast. What we do is we get your family members together all on a Zoom call. We talk about your grandfather or another member of the family, where I act as the MC, ask some questions, get feedback. This is a great family artifact that stays with your family, and you guys can share it with whomever you like. So if you're interested in finding out more about this personal podcast offering, please go to my website, check it out, and then shoot me an email. Hi, how's it going? I'm so excited that you have chosen to listen into this great conversation that I've had with Jeanne and Ed Gaffney. We are going to dive in and talk about how Jeanne and Ed have used RVing as a way to connect with their grandkids. At least a couple of grandkids have had the opportunity to go cross-country, up to Montana, over to Washington, D.C., all around, as well as discover new hobbies and interests based upon going out and hitting the open road with their grandparents. You guys are sure to enjoy this conversation, and it may just spark an interest in you in packing up those grandkids and heading out on the road for an adventure. So without further ado, let's jump in and listen to this conversation. Hello, and welcome to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. This is your host, Greg Payne, coming at you from Studio 12. This podcast is about being the best possible grandpa you can be, focusing on what it is to be a grandpa and how we can all share that experience together for our grandchildren. Hi, Jeanne. Hi, Ed. Thank you so much for being on the Cool Grandpa Podcast. I sure do appreciate you guys taking time out of your day to sit down with us and talk to us about RVing with grandchildren.
Well, thank you for having us, Greg.
One of the big things that I wanted to start our conversation out with is give us a little bit of background about how did you even get into RVing. I know I've got friends that have started that, trek or getting into the community of RVing, but how did you guys get started?
Well, I'll just jump right in here and tell you that we had friends. We lived in Montana for about 3 years, and there's a big push out there for RVing. So we had friends that had an RV, and we loved the whole concept of RVing. And they had a lazy days, and we bought a lazy days from Montclair, California, it was sight unseen. We just called them up and told them to build us one. And we absolutely fell in love with the whole concept, in that our friends were, they just took off. They enjoyed just the freedom of RVing, and that was very attractive to us. So that's why we got into RVing. And by the way, we have RV'd and been around the country with those friends many times since. So once we got the RV, we have fully enjoyed it. Ed, do you want to add anything?
Just that the Lazy Days company makes a Class C motorhome, and it's something you have to order specifically, individually. You can't buy them retail, so you've got to go to California and pick them up. So it's a rather unique kind of vehicle to camp in.
Okay, now is that one that you have to have the big, I don't know, I'm picturing in the back of my mind the pickup trucks that have almost like the hookup that you would see on a tractor trailer. Is that the kind of hookup that you need for these, or is this one that you just need a regular kind of tow hitch and a nice tow package on a truck or a van?
Well, it's a motorhome, so it's a unit that has its own chassis.
Gotcha. I'm sorry.
It's all right. It's about 27 foot long and just perfect for our needs.
So you drive it, but we also tow a car.
Okay.
So we have the freedom when we park to be able to explore the area.
Right. I've seen that before on the interstates. A lot of times a lot of people typically use smaller cars, right? Maybe the old, I'm saying the old Jeep, but the 2-door Jeeps and smaller type vehicles with the tow behind.
Yeah, for towing purposes, you need to either have a standard shift car or one that has a neutral that you can put the car in to be able to tow it flat. Or some people use a dolly. They put the front wheels up on a dolly behind the motorhome. So usually they're older models.
Okay. So you guys really got into this just having friends that were in the community, and you kind of saw how much fun they were having. Because I know out west, I lived in the Portland, Oregon, Washington State area. So we were very familiar about driving out into the middle of nowhere, and yet there's an RV park out there where,
Exactly.
So sometimes folks are there for a day or two, and then some folks are there like all summer. So very familiar with that. In the Southeast, I don't see quite as many. There's some around for sure, but I know it's definitely kind of a Western thing, especially if you're in Montana, any direction you go is practically a 10-hour drive to get somewhere. So those come in handy. So that's great that you guys got into that. Now, had that ever been something that you'd thought about prior to retirement or prior to even your friends introducing you to this, or was this just something that you kind of you started getting sucked into it by guilt by association, so to speak?
We never camped before. We rented an RV, and that's where we met up with our friends, and then made the decision this was something we really loved to do.
Okay, so you kind of tried it out, and then I guess the lifestyle sucked you in.
I really was attracted by the mobility, the ability to go places, set up and camp and see the area. I think that was one of my major interests.
Was that kind of being able to get out and away from the typical city? Because And what I mean by that is a lot of times if I'm going to Texas, I'm going to Dallas or Houston or San Antonio, but there's an awful lot of Texas to be seen. And if you don't have an RV or something, sometimes hotels might be a little bit sketchy in small towns. You know, to your point, you don't have the freedom to just travel someplace, set up camp for a couple of days, go do your hiking, see the area, and then pack up and leave.
Well, the other attractive thing to me was that the campgrounds, particularly at the national and state parks, are in really beautiful places where there are no hotels and motels. And so you have an opportunity to experience the environment there.
Now, when did you guys start going on trips and RVing with the grandchildren? Was that immediately, or was that a little bit after you guys have been doing this for a little while?
Well, we put our order in for our lazy days in 2006, and but we didn't really receive it until 2007. And I retired in 2007, and Ed retired in 2008. So we actually were not retired when we actually ordered it and received it, but that was a real incentive for us to retire, was that we just wanted to get on the highways and just see the country. And it's an excellent way to see the outdoors and see the country and visit the national parks and visit the president's libraries and do things that you normally wouldn't do. So we've really enjoyed RVing that way.
So I think it was shortly after we purchased this RV that we began to camp with two of the grandchildren. We have 11 grandchildren, but most of them are in the Maryland area, and there are only two here in the general Birmingham area. So it was shortly after that that we decided we were brave enough to take them to the local state park and introduce them to nature, give them an opportunity to ride bikes, do a little fishing, do a little hiking, go to the camp store, go to the playgrounds, and we just had a blast.
By the time we had got acquainted with RVing, the boys were 2 and 4. And we thought it was, they might be too young to want to camp with us. But we found out that they thought it a very big adventure. So it was fun for us to watch how much they enjoyed it.
Oh, sure. Well, and with the RV, you have the benefit, I think, of being able to be outside, you know, like some of the pictures in at the RV parks. Sometimes you have a fire circle or fire pit that's close to the pad. You're in a park area where there's some trails, there's the camp store, but you're not sleeping in the tent. So the little ones might feel a little bit more secure being sort of inside of a structure where, you know, every little squirrel that jumps around at night, you know, isn't a grizzly bear coming to get them. You know, I could see that was being a nice introduction to the outdoors for them. Did they start to expand on that a little bit as they got older, where they maybe wanted to be out in tents and be outside?
I don't really remember that happening. You know, we spent most of our days outside, and then our evenings we would spend playing games or watching TV, watching, you know, movies. But I don't think the guys did much tent camping at all.
Did they start to get involved with some of the planning activities at some point where they would pick out some of the locations you guys would go see and some of the activities you would do?
Well, as they got older, they would, but when they were younger, I remember they would bring their bikes to the campground, and they were, when they first started coming with us camping, they couldn't ride their bikes without their training wheels. And we were able to teach them to ride their bikes right there in the circle in the campground where we were. And that was kind of a fun thing for us. Now, these two boys that we were able to take camping are not brothers, they're cousins. So this was allowed them to get some bonding as cousins. They wouldn't be able to, that they would be able to get at home, just out in nature. And we did a lot of gathering firewood. We didn't buy a lot of firewood. We made them go out and find the wood for the fires. And we always had a fire. It didn't matter if it was 90 degrees outside. They always wanted to have a fire and poke it. That was a fun thing for them. So, but as they got older, we allowed them to pick and choose where they wanted to go and what they wanted to do when they got there.
Now, how did the parents react initially when you guys were starting to take these two cousins out? Because they were still pretty young at that point.
Well, they were very protective of their boys. And sometimes they would come to visit us at the campground, make sure everything was okay in the very beginning. But I think that they adjusted, and I think they got to the point where they thought of the time that we had the boys as their date time. So them and their spouse got to spend some time together. Because both these boys are they don't have siblings. Okay. So they were able to, the parents were able to get to spend some time together.
Sure.
I think as the boys got older, they were happy to see them leave. But they began to trust us to take care of the guys, and we became more confident in what we were doing. And as the boys grew older, they became a help to us. So it was great mutual relationship.
Sure. Now, how did the relationship when you are going camping with the RV, how does that change a little bit versus if the boys are just over at grandma and grandpa's house? Because with RVing, and I can imagine with camping, I've been scoutmaster and things before, there's some rules and some expectations. Were you guys able to transition a little bit into, hey, this is how things need to be done, how we store the equipment, and transition a little bit from that, or was it pretty seamless?
I think it was pretty seamless. We tried to keep the rules to a minimum because we looked at this as a vacation for all of us.
The rule was there are no rules.
Okay. And, these two guys were very, very respectful of the RV and the plans and respectful of us. And so we, in turn, tried to accommodate whatever they wanted to do.
And I would just like to throw in that if they had been at home with us, they might have been on electronics, watching TV, doing things that, boys do now. And out with us in nature, there's so much other things to do. There's so many other things to explore. We went on hikes and taught them how to fish, and just took them canoeing. And, there's so many other things to do rather than be on your grandparents' phones playing a game. So that was a big part of why we wanted to get them away from all of the electronics that the kids were faced with.
Oh, sure. Well, and did you guys notice a difference in confidence and abilities that the grandkids had as a result of going out on these RV trips and in these camping trips, where when you got to the site, right, you're kind of telling them to, hey, you've got to go gather up firewood. If you want a fire tonight, you guys got to go do that. You've got to do, a certain amount of camp chores, lack of a better word, but that they had a confidence about moving around in the woods or moving around in the RV park if they needed to run to the camp store by themselves.
I think sometimes we underestimate the confidence that young people have and their abilities. We can cite several examples, but one I can think of right off the bat is we had a trip to Washington, D.C., where we stayed at a campground close to the University of Maryland campus. And we would take the metro system in D.C. to go to various venues. And it took them one day to figure out that they were better at buying a ticket and deciding which direction to go than the old grandparents.
For the subway.
So they would run ahead of us and get the tickets that we needed. They'd be at the right station, the right platform, and we'd finally catch up with them out of breath. And then we'd head on our way. And, just kids are so smart, and we've never had any trouble with these guys.
Oh, sure. Well, and I think too that just the building of trust and the giving of trust to young people early on just helps create that sense of confidence. And I think sometimes we can withhold that a little bit and be fearful on their behalf, where sometimes it's like, a 10-year-old could find their way down to the camp store and pick up something that maybe was left behind. When you give them $5, they know where the camp store is or can figure it out. They can go down there themselves, get it, and come back. That, it's a little bit of a sense of, hey, I can do these things. I can interact with adults that aren't necessarily family members.
And that happened quite often with our boys. They and they would ask if they could go to the playground. Of course, we couldn't see the playground from where we were camping, and we just trusted them that everything was going to be fine when they were 8 and 10 years old. And campgrounds are generally safe, so we weren't too worried about their safety as far as with other human beings, but we're always worried about them getting hurt, which that never happened. But I will tell you a little story. There was a BMX track not very far from where we were camping. The boys took their bikes, and there was a huge, just to get a good start, to go over the little humps that they had to go over. It was just a huge dip when you first got on the track. And they were probably about, 5 and 7. And the younger one, when he got up and looked down to see how big the dip was, he said, "Oh, expletive." And the older one yelled, "Gigi, Bear said an ugly word." But he did it. He went down the dip. He got all the way around the track, and the next time he wasn't so fearful of it. And today he races dirt bikes. So, I mean, there's a lot of little things that go into what makes kids what they are when they get older, that the grandparents can have an influence over them.
Well, and that's a great point, that some of the confidence and some of these things, because I'm sure that moms and dads would try to keep them safe and maybe not let them go down that big ramp. But I think sometimes grandparents, of course, we're wanting safety for the grandchildren, but at times we can understand a little bit that, hey, some risk in a young person's life can pay off in a number of different ways, whether it's confidence at the time that they could do something difficult and scary, or it's opening them up to an interest that they may never have been exposed to.
That's true.
I remember once we were out in Montana, I let the boys go ziplining. And they just had a bow. And of course, to me, that's very dangerous. But to them, it was nothing. And the other element that plays into it, of course, is the competition that has developed between these two guys. Maybe it was in the Black Hills. They made us stop and they wanted to climb rocks. So we sat there holding our breath while they climbed way up on these rocks and got back down. And, it's just a ball. Just wonderful.
Well, my heart went pitter patter because they could have been hurt, but I just trusted that they wouldn't, because those, when you think about it, the parents entrust us, the grandparents, with the kids when we have them in our care, and you don't want them to get hurt, but you have to let go and let them do some of the things that would help them grow. And that's what our motto was, to just allow them to experience life and in the outdoors. And rock climbing was part of that. So, and sliding down a snow bank or whatever else that we were able to let them experience, because those are things that their parents would not let them do.
So we were in the Beartooth Mountains in Wyoming, Montana, and they were covered with snow. These guys were in shorts with sneakers, and they crawled up to the top of the slope and they slid down in those shorts and got wetter than the devil, and it was just a lot of fun.
Oh, that sounds awesome. I remember as a kid myself going backpacking and camping up in the Idaho mountains. Very similar thing. The Scoutmaster, had all these 12, 14, 16-year-olds make it into camp, and there's some glacier snow and things above the lake, and we're scampering all around there, and then we're freezing cold and wet because we were all playing in the snow, even though it was middle of summer, and had to get those clothes dried out and warm us back up. So those are great memories to have.
Yeah, sure.
Now, when we were talking a week or so ago, there was a story about almost taking the top off the roof, or taking the roof off. And I wanted to get to have you guys talk about that story a little bit with the audience.
Well, one of the grandsons developed an infection in their ear. And so we took them to a local clinic, and they had some prescriptions for him. So we wanted to stop at one of the major drugstore chains in Florida. And we pulled into the parking lot in the RV. And what we failed to notice is that there was a big metal barrier across the entranceway that was about
10 feet.
10 feet. Our RV is 10 and a half or so feet. And because of the overhang and a Class C motorhome to the windshield, I really didn't see it. And so I heard crunching. And the only thing I could do, of course, was back up. And so I backed up and I parked over by the service entrance, and the boys and I scrambled to the roof to find out what was going on. And we found the solar panel all bent up and a couple of the vents torn up. Unfortunately, I stopped before we reached the air conditioner, but I found a roll of duct tape. And so the three of us are on the roof, duct taping everything down so it wouldn't blow away when we hit the highway again. And so we had to wait till later to get that repaired when we got home. But those are the sorts of adventures that make life.
Oh yeah, those are going to be the conversations at family reunions and get-togethers that are going to come up. Is that bringing up, hey, remember that time where Grandpa almost took the top off the camper? And it'll be a great 10-minute story with a lot of laughter and a lot of fond memories there.
The good thing from that episode was that they got to stay in a hotel that night.
That night.
They think when we're in the RV, if we get to stay in a hotel, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Especially if it has a swimming pool.
Of course. Yeah, the swimming pool is the key, especially if it's an indoor pool or if it's summertime and you can be in the outdoor pool if they've got
Right.
one. Now, what's the last adventure that you guys have had with the grandkids? What's the latest adventure that you've had?
Well, the last time, last June, we went down to Key Largo in Florida. We had a good friend who is a scuba instructor. And so we thought it would be kind of cool to take the boys down and let them get their scuba license. And so we went down there for a week, and they went out in the Gulf, diving 3 straight days, twice a day. They were totally exhausted. They narrowly escaped a couple of dangerous adventures, but they got licensed. So we were very proud of that. In fact, one of the boys is taking a welding course on the side. This is a straight A average guy, but he's taking a welding course on the side. And there's been a conversation about doing some underwater welding as a career.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I know that's a top dollar type job too, with the oil rigs in the Gulf and some of that maintenance work.
It's going to be even more top dollar now.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness.
But that was our last adventure. I think this year, one of the boys is in college and the other one's working for the summer. And so I guess all that's sort of gone at this point.
It's too bad. The one thing that I'd like to ask you guys too is, thinking back over all the years that you've been RVing with the grandkids, is how would you recommend other grandparents starting this type of activity with their grandkids? You know, and maybe what in your opinion might be too young to be taking kids out?
Well, we started ours out at 2 and 4. We were with some friends at lunch today that has a 4-year-old, and they said, we'll never take that 4-year-old out camping. But I think it depends on the child itself. But I wouldn't be afraid if you think that the child is old enough to stay overnight without crying for its parent. I think that's old enough to take it camping. I mean, it could be 2 or 3 or 4 years old, but do you agree?
Yeah, I don't think you have to go very far. I mean, camping is camping. It could be 10 miles down the road from your home. And that's basically what we did the first few times. We went to the local state campground, and, it was like they were 100 miles away. So you're close enough that if the kid has a problem, your child has a problem, you can always bring them home. But we never had that issue. I mean, children are so resilient, and, they love their grandparents, and they're just happy and safe with us. And it all worked out so well.
Oh, that's good. What's some of the advice as far as planning the trips with the grandchildren? What advice would you have for people?
Well, my advice would be, if they're old enough to write, that you give them a journal. And every evening after the day is done, they've had their baths and showers, whatever, you let them sit at the dinette and write about their day, because that's something very important for them to look back on. We started out very early with our boys journaling, and they journaled right up until probably the last couple of trips that we took. I don't think they probably journaled, but they still have all those journals of. We have taken them to Washington, D.C., Yellowstone, New York, Disney World, on a kayaking trip, Grand Canyon, Las Vegas, and to the Keys. And those journals are going to be so important for them later on, or maybe passing down to their children. And the other thing is when you go anywhere that, like to a national park, Washington, D.C. is a very good place to have one, but get the National Park Passport. And that is the book that has, you stamp so that they can have those stamps from everywhere they've been. And we went all over Washington, D.C. to every location that had a stamp, just so those boys could have their, get their book stamped. And it was just one of those most important things for them. They carried those books. They still have those books, and I'm sure that that's something else they'll share with their kids. So I think that's a very important thing. And you probably have something more practical.
Well, no, the only thing that became important the older they got was to have a meeting and talk about where they wanted to go on the trip and what they wanted to do. And so we actually got out maps and books and looked at stops along the way to see what was there that would be the most adventurous for them, because we needed, I felt, their buy-in. And therefore they have some ownership in the activities that we were going to have. And that worked out very, very well.
Especially when we went to Disney World, because they had certain rides they wanted to ride. And so they wrote them down, and so we had we went through AAA to do the planning. And so we were able to fit in all the things that they wanted to do. So I think that was an important thing that.
Yeah, as you may know, Disney World has just a wonderful campground down there called Fort Wilderness. And that was thoroughly enjoyable. Very nice campground, very accessible to the rest of the parks in the Disney World setup. So that worked out terrifically. The boys also, on our trips west, would designate places they wanted to stop. We would identify a few places and then ask them about it. This canyon or, whatever, museum. I remember wherever the St. Joseph, Missouri, where the Pony Express started.
I think so.
Mount Rushmore.
There was a hotel there that had a number of things you were supposed to identify in various exhibits. And you got a little sheet of paper and you're supposed to find these things, then mark them off as you found them. I mean, the competition was fierce. I mean, they ran from one end of that building to the other till they found all 20 or 25 things they were supposed to identify. Then they get a little token. And stuff like that's so important to boys.
Oh, absolutely. Once that little competitive spirit kicks in, then it just takes over. So how do you guys feel that doing this camping and RVing has brought you closer with the grandchildren?
Well, from my point of view, I can't think of a tighter relationship than we have with these grandchildren. These boys, get a lot of hugs. I love you. They care very much about us. Of course, we care about them. But it's a very tight relationship that we have enjoyed. And I think camping contributed greatly to creating that relationship.
Well, and I think, too, that sometimes we forget about how important that shared experience is amongst whoever's in the group, grandparents and grandchildren, parents and children, whatever, that kind of, hey, we all went through the big heavy rainstorm together and we got soaked and, flooded out and we, survived this experience. And then also the really positive experiences too. Hey, this was just something that this group did, and it's not to the exclusion of other family members, but there's that shared experience that just has a special bond to it.
Absolutely. Yep.
So, well, I've had you guys on for a little bit. Is there anything about RVing with grandkids that I haven't asked you, or anything that you would like to share?
Well, the only statement I would make is don't be afraid to try things with the grandkids. Don't be afraid to take trips with them. You kind of have to balance the age with the size of the trip. I mean, quite honestly, there were trips where we knew the guys were getting bored. And one trip, Jeannie actually flew the two boys back to their home and then came back out to join me, and we continued the rest of our trip. So you just have to weigh what you can accomplish with young boys.
Well, at that point in time, the boys were 10 and 12, and we had gone to Yellowstone, and we'd been on the road for 28 hours to get there. So that was about 3.5 days of travel. And after we did all and when you're in Yellowstone, you're mostly in the car looking for animals.
Yep.
And so being in the car a lot, we just thought that they just needed to. We usually never kept them out over 2 weeks, but that was probably a long time for them to be in the car. So we just we made arrangements that I flew them home, just because I didn't want them to have to be in the car 28 more hours to get home. So you have to take a lot of things into consideration when you're going to go on a long trip that way. Of course, you wouldn't do that with a younger child, 2 and 4 or 4 and 6 or something. That would be older children. But and then when they got really quite older, I think it was at Grand Canyon,
Mm-hmm.
we stayed out there for I don't know, probably 10 days. And then they flew home themselves. They were old enough at that point to just put them on a plane and fly them home.
Sure.
But so you have to think about the short trips and the long trips and what the caveats are with the long trips.
And don't forget, young people eat a lot. And so make sure you pack a ton of food, all kind of treats and snacks and drinks and what have you.
And let them go to the grocery store with you to pick those out.
Yeah.
And even when they're younger, take them to the grocery store and let them pick out their treats, or let them help you make the menu out. So they'll have meals that they'll eat, because what we like is not necessarily what they'll eat.
Oh, that's good advice. Anything else that pops to mind that would be even maybe a word to the wise? I mean, you've already talked about, having them help out with menus and making sure the trips aren't too long. Are there anything in particular, and where my head's at, anything around the campgrounds themselves that you might be able to identify as far as, oh, we should go to this campground versus that campground, even if they're in the same area?
Well, we always chose campgrounds that had some amenities for the children. If there was a campground down the road that had a swimming pool and the cost was a little higher, we chose that one so that they could have, time to get in the pool. Some campgrounds have shuffleboard, they have tennis, they have amenities. And I would say, even if you have to pay a little more money for that, I would do that to give them more things to do as they're a little older.
Yeah, I recall one night out in Montana, in Bozeman, Montana, the boys and I were swimming in the pool at the campground at 10 o'clock at night. So as they get older, their hours change. And so as grandparents, your hours have to change with them. But Other than that, it's not a cheap endeavor to all you grandparents out there. It's a little cheaper than staying in hotel rooms, but you also need to keep in mind it's good to go out to eat every once in a while. The boys had their favorites, and their favorites kind of changed with each trip. And sometimes it's not our favorite, but it's their trip.
Jeanne and Ed, I've had you on here for quite a while, and I really do appreciate, again, you stopping by the Cool Grandpa podcast and sharing your wisdom and experiences with RVing with the grandkids. This has been a fabulous conversation for us, and I know a lot of people will get value from what you've been able to share here today.
Well, thank you, Greg, for having us.
Yeah, it's been terrific. I hope we can provide a little help to those other grandparents who are considering doing the same thing. So,
well, thank you. What a fun conversation. Also, what an enjoyable idea. Packing up an RV, heading out with a couple of the grandkids on adventure. Man, I think that they had a great idea about, one, it doesn't have to be cross country your first time out. It can be to the lake. It could be up to a state park that's close by. Taking it easy and everybody learning to adjust to this new activity, right? I've thought about, and I'm thinking about actively, what a cool idea it would be to grab an old sports car and someday hit the open road with my grandkids for some quality one-on-one time, but where they could plan where we go. It would be up to them. It would be their adventure, but it would be an adventure that we're both participating in. What is your big takeaway from this conversation? What has this inspired you to go do? I would love for you to let me know. Shoot me an email or leave me a comment. So, until next time, remember to stay cool. Thank you for listening to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor and share it with a friend. That's the best way you can help us to expand our community, as well as get the news out about how valuable grandpas are in the lives of those kids. If you'd like to leave me a comment or shoot me a potential topic for this podcast, please go to www.cool-grandpa.us. Look for the comments tab, fill it out, hit submit. It's as easy as that. Until next time, remember to stay cool.